Good afternoon. Thank you for joining us. Well, the Trans Mountain Pipeline will soon be up and running and may be up for sale by the federal government. It's a milestone Finance Minister Chrystia Freeland hailed during her budget speech on Tuesday. How do you feel about the now $34 billion investment in the Trans Mountain Expansion Project? In about half an hour, we'll hear about a program tracking homelessness in some of BC's small communities. What impact is the issue having in yours? I'm Michelle Elliott. Welcome to BC Today. Thanks for joining us on CBC Radio 1, CBC Television, and live streaming on the CBC News app, cbc.ca/BC, and on the CBC Vancouver YouTube page. And you can call us now on our top story. How do you feel about the now $34 billion expansion investment in the Trans Mountain Pipeline Expansion Project? You can call us 1-800-825-5950, 604-669-3733, and you can hit pound 690 on your cell phone. Our email is bctoday@cbc.ca. Well, the federal government bought the Trans Mountain Expansion Project 6 years ago for $7.5 billion. And since then, the cost for the pipeline that goes from Edmonton to BC has ballooned to $34 billion. And Ottawa has long promised it would sell the project once it's complete. Liberal MPs celebrated that milestone in the project during Tuesday's budget speech.
The talented tradespeople and the brilliant engineers last Thursday made the final weld. It's known as the Golden Weld on a great national project, the Trans Mountain Pipeline.
Yep.
That's right. That's right. Mr. Speaker, it took an activist, determined Liberal government to get it built. And last week, the Bank of Canada estimated that this project alone will add 1/4 of a percentage point to Canada's GDP.
That's Federal Finance Minister Chrystia Freeland during her budget speech on Tuesday. Now, the Trans Mountain Pipeline has long been contentious here in BC, and so might be its sale. We're asking you, how do you feel about the now $34 billion investment in the Trans Mountain Pipeline project? You can call us 1-800-825-5950, 604-669-3733. You can hit pound 690 on your cell phone. Our email is bctoday@cbc.ca. Well, CBC News business reporter Kyle Bax has been covering this story, and he joins me now from Calgary. Hi, Kyle.
Hi there, Michelle.
The Golden Weld. Quite a turn of phrase. I hadn't heard that before, but it's apparently finished now. A really long history, though, to get to this point. And I have to say, it's been a while since we've talked about the Trans Mountain Pipeline. Can you just give us a bit of a review of that timeline and the scrutiny this project has undergone?
Well, it's been a long journey. This project was first proposed by Kinder Morgan about 12 years ago to twin this pipeline that runs from Edmonton to Burnaby. And it was about 6 years ago that the project was on life support, facing so much opposition. And most importantly, there was political opposition. There were court challenges, regulatory hurdles as well. And so that's when the federal government stepped in and bought the project. And then it was late in 2019 when construction actually began. And construction, there have been problems. There have been delays, partially because of COVID, partially because of floods, wildfires, lots of different issues. And it was during that time that the cost really started to balloon. And so that's what the latest estimate is, $34 billion. And in terms of why it's so controversial, you know, there are some Indigenous groups that oppose this project. That's been well documented. There's also quite a few that do support it. But there are also a lot of environmental concerns, especially in BC with some of those critical waterways. What happens if there's a spill or a leak? What about all the increased tanker traffic? What will be the impact there on marine life? And then, of course, if you have this project, it could allow the oil patch to expand in Alberta. And because of that, there's concerns about climate change and the emissions. So it is a very controversial project.
Yes, we certainly heard, over the course of that time from the Tsleil-Waututh Nations, the Musqueam First Nation and Coldwater as well about the project. Just looking back at all the coverage that it did get, now that it is complete, as we heard from the finance minister, what does that mean for the pipeline?
So ever since the federal government stepped in and bought the project, the federal government has said they don't want to be the long-term owner. And they have had at least one offer to purchase the project many years ago, but they said they wanted to hold off until the project was complete. So we've now reached that milestone. And so the question is, how long does the federal government want to remain as owner? The government has said it is interested in, when it does sell the project, to make sure that there is some sort of Indigenous ownership or Indigenous equity stake or participation. We don't know exactly what that could look like. There are two different groups that have publicly said that they are interested in purchasing the project. Both are Indigenous led. One of them in particular is based out of Kamloops, and they say they have about 40 different communities along the pipeline route that are on board and want to purchase this project. And there are going to be other potential buyers. It could be pension funds. It could be other financial institutions. But what we do know is that they're not going to be paying $34 billion. That is highly unlikely. The experts I spoke to say it's going to be at a significant discount to that. So based on the tolls that are being charged, so oil companies have to pay to use this pipeline, based on those tolls, the value of the project is probably about half of that $34 billion. So not 34, not 30, 25, maybe 20, or a bit lower than that. So that, of course, could change, but that's what experts are saying. That's the kind of discount that we're talking about. And that's going to be a very interesting number when it finally comes.
And so there's that. Overall, what are the challenges then for the government as it prepares to sell?
This is going to be a very difficult decision for the governing Liberals right now in Ottawa. It's not only when are they going to sell it. We do know that there's an election coming up sometime in the next 18 months. Who's going to buy it? And then also what that price is going to be. And so there's a lot of discussion already. Do the federal Liberals, does it make more sense for them to sell this before the election? Or do you want to go into an election owning an oil pipeline? There are some parts of this country where that, that's not really what the federal Liberals probably want to do. And how this project gets sold, that could really change how some voters think about this government in terms of how they handle economic issues, financial issues, Indigenous issues, and of course the environment. So some really big considerations that the government has to make now that this pipeline is complete.
Okay, certainly something we'll follow. And I should mention, we reached out to Trans Mountain this morning, and I don't know what kind of comment they've provided on this, the completion or the potential sale, Kyle.
Not really talking too much about the potential sale just as a Crown corporation, but they have said, the pipeline is complete and oil should start moving around May 1st. Speaking with the federal government, though, they just provide a statement basically saying that, it's an important investment for the economy. It's going to create good paying jobs and revenue. And in terms of this divestment process, they just said in due course. So pretty vague, no timeline there.
Okay, something to watch here in BC and where you are in Calgary as well. Kyle, thanks so much.
Thanks, Michelle.
Kyle Bax is a CBC reporter with the Network Business Unit, and he joined us from Calgary. And we'd love to hear from you. How do you feel about the now $34 billion investment in the Trans Mountain Pipeline Expansion Project? You can call 1-800-825-5950, 604-669-3733. By email, it's bctoday@cbc.ca. Eric is calling from Victoria. Hi, Eric.
Hi, thanks for taking my call.
Sure.
Yeah, I've been an opponent of the Trans Mountain Pipeline ever since it started to gain some traction in the press. And I've got to say how disappointed I am that Trudeau bailed out a failing pipeline and promised the coastline and environmentalists that the ocean protection plan would be funded by the profits of the Trans Mountain Pipeline. And obviously, as we all knew, there would be no profits from the pipeline, and there will not be at a $34 billion price tag. You know, to me, we are really at the bad end of the pipeline. You know, there's other euphemisms I can use, but Alberta gets the benefit, BC gets the bad end. If anything bad happens in the Salish Sea, and it's almost sure to, there's virtually no protection for the orcas, for the salmon, for anything in the ocean. When you look at their world-class ocean protection plan, it's very easy to be world-class when the most anybody's ever been able to clean up after an oil spill in the open ocean is roughly about 5%. That leaves 95% of that floating around the Salish Sea. Not even to mention the amount of noise and the increased traffic that is driving the orcas and out of the Salish Sea.
And just for context for our listeners and our audience, Eric, as you're speaking, you know, you're referring to the increased shipping traffic. The expansion was expected to result in a 7-fold increase in the number of tankers traveling through the waters around Vancouver and Victoria. And among the conditions the pipeline project had to meet, you know, one of them was this, as you were referring to, this they called it world-class ocean protection plan to mitigate effects from a spill, and you're saying that's not going to be sufficient.
Well, world-class, the bar is very, very low. You know, it becomes a word salad when you start talking about how you're going to clean up the ocean. And the last time I talked to Jonathan Wilkinson face-to-face, he told me that the profits from the Trans Mountain Pipeline were required to get a just transition from fossil fuels to renewable energy. Well, I can tell you that the only thing that just transitioned is the southern resident orcapods have just transitioned out of the Salish Sea. And that's because of lack of salmon, lack of habitat, and too much noise.
Okay. Yeah, you have a way with words, Eric. Thanks very much for the call. Appreciate it.
You're quite welcome.
Take care. That's Eric in Victoria. Jim is up next now at Spence's Bridge. What are your thoughts on the Trans Mountain Pipeline expansion now being completed, Jim?
Hi. I'm against the Trans Mountain Pipeline as well for environmental reasons and economic. However, I know they're going to sell it, and this will be a huge subsidy to any corporation that buys it. You know, it'll be a massive subsidy. And I certainly hope a foreign corporation does not pick it up, because that'd be the mother of all subsidies to a foreign corporation. And I would prefer that the government actually keeps the pipeline. And there's various reasons for that. If people want to shut it down in the future, if Alberta decides to separate or something like that, they can do that. And if the government does actually want to build another pipeline, it'd probably make it easier for them to continue ownership of the pipeline right away in order to build a new one in the future, which I hope never actually happens, but you never know. You know, we got to look at the subsidy and...
it's the economic cost, is what you're saying.
Yeah.
Okay.
And why should Canadians have to subsidize some corporation to receive the benefits of this thing?
Okay. Jim, thank you very much for the call from Spence's Bridge.
Good day.
Good day to you. It's 12:20 now, 1:20 in the Mountain Time Zone, and we're asking you here on BC Today how you feel about the now $34 billion investment in the Trans Mountain Pipeline. The federal government purchasing the pipeline project 6 years ago for $7.5 billion. Construction costs have jumped since then. And now that the pipeline is complete, the government possibly could sell, as it has long promised to do so. So we're asking you how you feel about this milestone in that project, which has long been controversial here in BC. John is up next in Abbotsford. Hi, John. What are your thoughts?
Oh, hi. Yeah, thanks for taking my call.
Sure.
Well, there's so many, but just to focus perhaps on the economics again of this pipeline. I think we've kind of lost track of how much a billion really is, and we're talking about $35 billion for 1,000 kilometers of pipeline, and that works out to like 35 million per kilometer, which in my mind is an absolutely insane amount of money to spend on a pipe in the ground that's just moving, the dirtiest oil on the planet to our shore for export. It just doesn't make any sense. And I live in Abbotsford, right next to well, they call it a farm, the tank farm, and and I've witnessed over the last couple of decades we've had significant oil spills there. That caused a great deal of grief for the local community, and we just see this kind of industry being subsidized and supported over and over and over by whatever government's in power, and it just doesn't make any sense. Imagine what we could do with with $35 billion in terms of I don't know, so many different projects.
When you hear, John, may I just ask you, when you hear the federal finance ministers, celebrating that this is now complete because it has been such a long road, and you referred to the oil as the dirtiest oil on the planet, I'm just thinking of what some in the industry might say as, defending their product as, its domestic product, and that's kind of the goal is to increase domestic production as opposed to purchasing foreign-produced oil.
Well, we're already pumping through the Fraser Valley. We're already pumping like 300,000 barrels a day, and that's enough. We didn't when we challenged this pipeline and said, well, we don't want it. It's not that we wanted to pull the plug on everything. We can't because we're still very dependent on it. But 1 million barrels a day, 900,000 barrels a day, that's again, that it just boggles the mind. There's just no need for it. I don't believe there's a need anywhere on the planet for this.
John, thank you very much. Good to hear from you in Abbotsford.
Okay, bye.
Bye-bye. That's John calling us on the Trans Mountain Pipeline. And let's hear now from Laura in Port Coquitlam. Hi, Laura. Good afternoon.
Hi. Thanks for taking my call.
Sure thing. What are your thoughts on the completion of the Trans Mountain Pipeline?
Well, I find it discouraging. I just want to clarify that the pipeline is to carry bitumen, diluted bitumen, not oil.
Dilbit, yes, sorry. Yes.
Yeah, it's such an important piece of this.
Fair.
But I also want to mention that we're living the reality of a climate crisis, and we're seeing rising emissions in Canada. We aren't reining in our emissions like we should be, like other countries in the world are. We have great opportunities in Canada to diversify and find different forms of energy that won't continue to pump greenhouse gas emissions into our atmosphere. And I really worry about the next generation. I'm concerned that the future that we're leaving for the next generation is going to be untenable if we continue to build fossil fuel infrastructure into the future.
Are you getting enough reassurance from the federal government? Thinking about the budget on Tuesday, and the focus was affordability and housing, and looking at, I took a look at the budget and looking through for, references to climate change. There are measures for farmers, for example, who are affected by climate events and things like that. But in the sense of what the focus has been on, which is affordability, given the public's, struggles with affordability, do you worry that people or the government is kind of moving away from that focus on shifting from fossil fuel use and abating climate change?
I think yesterday's budget, the government missed a huge opportunity to stop subsidizing the fossil fuel industry, and they show no signs of even considering that. And I think as long as our taxpayers' money is subsidizing a polluting industry that is causing climate change, everybody knows that now, we're in a deeply problematic place. So I'm really concerned that the federal government needs to stop subsidizing fossil fuel projects and infrastructure, and let's turn the corner and transition to more sustainable forms of energy, because the future looks grim for young people, and I'm really worried about that.
Laura, thank you so much for the call.
Thank you.
That's Laura in Port Coquitlam. It is 12:26 now, 1:26 in the Mountain Time Zone. This is BC Today. We'll bring you a lot more on the Trans Mountain Pipeline story as well in our next half hour. We'll hear from an SFU professor of sustainable engineering and another call as well, and some emails on the topic. And a lot more on the day's top stories on the afternoon shows in your region. And here's what's coming up on the Coast.
Michelle, hi there. It's Gloria Makarenko here, and I hope you can join us between 3 and 6 this afternoon for On the Coast. Local author and illustrator Michael Kleckner is going to join us. He's got a new book out. It's called Surviving Vancouver. Lots of amazing images, and it's a reflection on the changes that he's seen in a city that has a lot more condos and towers and fewer heritage buildings than it did decades ago. Also, the Allusionist podcast. It has been celebrated in the Guardian newspaper and on iNews UK. It's won a British Podcast Award. Well, the podcast host, Helen Zaltzman, is in town for an event at the Planetarium, but first, she's going to drop by our studios for a chat. I hope you can join us between 3 and 6 for On the Coast.
Thank you very much, Gloria. The Allusionist podcast. I am intrigued. That's Gloria Makarenko with On the Coast, and that will be on the air this afternoon at 3 o'clock on CBC Radio 1 in Metro Vancouver. A lot more of your reaction to our question. How do you feel about the now $34 billion investment into the Trans Mountain Pipeline expansion project? The project now having reached completion, and the federal government at a bit of a crossroads in terms of what to do with this investment and this project. Let's hear now from some emails that you've sent us, bctoday@cbc.ca. Cam writes, build some refineries at the end of it. Karen writes, appalling given the urgency of the climate emergency. That money could have gone towards reducing greenhouse gases and protecting nature instead of adding to the problem. Ray writes, Justin Trudeau promised that the profits generated by Trans Mountain would go toward fighting climate change. There was never going to be any profits, and now at $34 billion, it will only be sold at a massive loss. Thank you very much for your emails. Again, 1-800-825-5950, 604-669-3733, pound 690 on your cell phone if you would like to weigh in some more on the Trans Mountain Pipeline expansion project. It is now 12:29. This is BC Today here on CBC. We're live on Radio 1, CBC Television, and we're live streaming too online, cbc.ca/BC. You can find us on YouTube at CBC Vancouver, or you can use the CBC Gem service or the CBC News app. I'm Michelle Elliott. Very nice to be with you this afternoon. Coming up, we are going to hear from a sustainable engineering professor at SFU on the Trans Mountain Pipeline and the messaging from the federal government. And we're also going to talk about homelessness and how it is affecting smaller communities in BC. They may not get as many headlines. We're going to find out what a local project at Selkirk College is finding out about the homeless population and people experiencing homelessness in the West Kootenays. And we're asking you as well, if you live in a small community, we'd like to hear what impact are you seeing from the issue of homelessness. That is all coming up in our next half hour. Right now it's 12:30, 1:30 in the Mountain Time Zone. Time for your CBC News Update with Robert Zimmerman.
Good afternoon. The provincial government says analysis of short-term rental data from March showed that more than 19,000 entire homes in the province are listed for rent for most of the year. That figure will change starting next month. when the new short-term rental rules kick in for more than 60 communities in BC. Premier David Eby says the rules will allow the government to crack down on speculators who are effectively operating mini hotels. The union representing Blue Bus drivers and mechanics in West Vancouver says it has set an April 29th deadline for a new contract. If that doesn't happen, it says its members will take part in a strike vote ahead of possible job action. And the City of Vancouver says the Cambie Bridge will be completely closed at 7 o'clock tonight. Drivers, cyclists, and pedestrians will have to find another route across False Creek. The shutdown is for a movie shoot, and the bridge will reopen at 6 o'clock tomorrow morning. And now the forecast on the north coast. Sunny this afternoon with a high of 17. Highs around 7 with sunshine in the Peace. In the central interior, including Prince George, sunny with a high of 10 degrees. Highs from 8 to 12 with a mix of sun and cloud in the Kootenays. In the southern interior, including Kelowna, some sun and cloud with a high of 13. And for Metro Vancouver, Greater Victoria, and the Fraser Valley, mainly sunny this afternoon. A bit windy in some areas, with highs reaching 17 inland. And that's your CBC News update from Vancouver.
Thank you, Rob.
You're welcome, Michelle.
It's going to be an exciting weekend for Canucks fans.
I think the first game is Tuesday, but maybe. Is it this weekend?
Yes. Is it Sunday or Monday? Let me just
I
check.
thought it was Tuesday.
I'm going to lean on you for your Canucks knowledge.
I'm not great at scheduling, but
okay, if people
it's
know.
coming up. It's
Yes,
either
it is
going to be an
coming up.
exciting weekend or an exciting week next week.
Next week. Okay.
Yeah.
In any case, are you preparing?
I'm always excited when the Canucks are in the playoffs. Sure, yeah.
Yeah, I mean,
I'm
I
excited.
get swept up in Canuck fever as well, even though I'm not a consistent fan. But it's really fun. The
Jump
city
on
changes.
the bandwagon,
I do.
Michelle. We do not mind. Well, I mean, 2011, I actually covered Game 7 down here, and then covered the riot after. But leading up to that was so fantastic, right? I don't know if you remember everybody.
I do.
Sitting on the street out here, watching on the big screens.
Watching on the big screen, there was this sense of excitement all the time. People were so friendly, and things really turned after that. So
up until that point, it was fantastic.
It was.
So hopefully they have another deep run, and we can have that again, minus the riot. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. People, can we just focus on the fun and not turn it into anything nefarious?
And this year they're probably going to win, so there's nothing to riot about.
Yeah, are they?
Sure, yeah. I mean, Mark in the control room thinks the Oilers are going to win, but there's no way they are going to win.
No,
the Canucks,
okay, all right. I'm gonna, whatever superstition anyone has regarding the Canucks, go do it. Wear that shirt. Cut your hair. Don't cut your hair. Whatever you do.
Yeah, I won't be cutting my hair.
Grow the beard.
Sure.
Thanks.
Yeah, I'll grow the beard.
Rob. He's
All right.
Carrie is joining us from Kelowna to talk about the Trans Mountain Pipeline expansion. Hi, Carrie.
Hi there.
Hi, what are your thoughts?
I don't see a problem with this expansion because we can't rely on only one means of power. We need all power possible. Using electricity alone is not going to save the planet. It's just as toxic, probably more so, than using gas. People need to slow down. They need to stop taking all these trips, these cruises, these flights, these car rides. They need to start enjoying life. And we also need to stop making so many babies. Adopt. Too many people on the planet. That's our biggest problem.
So it's looking at a demand rather than this particular expansion.
Yeah.
Okay. Carrie, thank you very much.
Sure.
Take care.
Have a good day.
You too. That's Carrie.
Bye-bye.
Carrie from Kelowna. Well, earlier today, I had a chance to speak with Zafar Adil, and he is a professor at SFU. He's the executive director for the Pacific Water Research Center and director for the School of Sustainable Energy Engineering at Simon Fraser University. I asked him for his thoughts on the completion of the project.
It sends a bit of a mixed message because on the one side, we are pushing quite hard as a country to reach net zero targets. On the other side, when we are expanding the delivery of fossil fuels for us internally in terms of reaching towards our net zero targets, and for our partners to the outside world, it certainly sends some very mixed messages.
When the federal government bought the project, it did so saying that it had met these conditions, and they felt that the conditions were able to mitigate any environmental impacts. What do you think of that?
Well, yes, I think the federal government had said that it's setting aside resources for mitigating any environmental impacts, including some resources for addressing any spills that might occur, and particularly to the Burrard Inlet, which obviously would be at risk if any spills were to happen. So that is there, but that still doesn't mitigate the risk in itself, which is always there, of potential spills. It would also increase the shipping traffic into the Burrard Inlet just because there's a greater throughput of oil going through, so that in itself would also create some environmental impact or disturbance to the ecosystem in the inlet. And there is, of course, concerns which were sort of overridden in the construction process, which had to do with the extension of the pipeline itself and the environmental impact that it caused the construction process.
And you talked about pursuing the expansion of fossil fuel production and transport. Do you see that now as a priority for the federal government, if you look at Tuesday's federal budget?
Well, yes. I think it's more of lip service, I guess, to climate change. And I know that there are some pretty significant strategies that are being pursued, particularly around carbon pricing and carbon rebates that would go to small and medium scale businesses. So there is that side of it, but in reality, we need to be focusing on reducing emissions overall, and not just looking at how the emissions are taxed and using that as a way of reducing emissions in the long run. So, again, it's a bit of a mixed message. And when I looked at the Minister Freeland's speech, it wasn't really very clear, and that whole message around striving towards net zero emissions did not come through very clearly. And which is obvious. Politically, I think the government is focusing on housing, for example, as a big area, which, by the way, also has a significant carbon footprint associated with it. And so we would have to be very careful on how those investments are made into the housing sector. So in short, the notion of climate change mitigation and adaptation being very high priorities for the government did not jump out from the budget speech or how the budget is constructed.
That's Zafar Adil, a professor at Simon Fraser University. A lot more emails here coming in too. Alistair writes, why would they even sell it? Norway to Saudi Arabia. It's called a sovereign wealth fund. I don't even know how it's up for debate. Canadians paid for it. Canadians should get the benefits. How is selling at a loss of billions even considered an option? And Rich writes from Port Moody, it looks like hindsight is always 2020. All the wasted time, effort, money that BC and the rest of Canada taxpayers lost. We still ended up with a pipeline that should have been left alone in the first place. Michael writes, an investment means someone is going to make money or have a benefit as a result. The government did not invest. They bought it and put our money into it, and now we will have to sell at a loss. Please avoid using the word investment in the wrong way. Douglas writes, keep the gas in the land, keep the oil in the soil, and the coal in the hole. What part of global boiling don't these corporate captured governments understand? Thank you for all your emails. bctoday@cbc.ca is where you can reach us. 12:40 now, 1:40 in the Mountain Time Zone. Well, when we talk about homelessness, we often hear about people in larger cities in BC. And there's a new research project now taking a look at homelessness in 3 West Kootenay communities: Trail, Nelson, and Castlegar. Now, the researchers have made some interesting findings in just the first year of this 3-year study. They found things like homelessness is increasing, and people are harder to track than they are in urban centers, and also that local resources aren't enough. We're asking you for your observations and experiences. How is homelessness affecting BC's small communities? We especially want to hear from you if you live in a smaller BC municipality. And our number is 1-800-825-5950, 604-669-3733, and you can hit pound 690 on your cell phone. Our email, again, is bctoday@cbc.ca. Joining me now is Jamie Jones, a researcher with Selkirk Innovates at Selkirk College and the project director for Bridging Rural Homelessness and Wellbeing, a sustainable and collaborative regional response. Hi, Jamie. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon. Thanks for having me.
Why was this research needed?
Well, the population of those that are experiencing homelessness has been increasing in our region, and this is something that became more visible, especially after the pandemic. It's always been here, but it's been more hidden, couch surfing. But now you're seeing more folks actually visible on the street and living rough. And this project was us at the college listening to what the community needed. And we were hearing that there's lots of really good work happening in all the 3 communities to support those that are experiencing homelessness. But there's silos. And to be able to regional response and a regional approach to build relationships between the organizations and between the communities that are serving a population that is actually moving between communities.
Tell me more about that. How does that make things very different when you're trying to come up with resources for people experiencing homelessness in your region?
Well, what I've really heard is the folks are moving between between shelters. They'll be at the Trail shelter and then they'll end up at the Nelson shelter or the Castlegar shelter. And there's not as much communication between the shelters, or going to different services that is needed to help support and help provide what's needed to be able to get out of the position of being unhoused, might be in different communities or different hours. And so, that's a key piece of why folks are moving. And then the resources piece is each organization is trying to do the best they can, but there's limited resources in our rural communities. And so it's unfortunately a bit of competition between different communities, just the way that the policies are in place right now. But it's needed to collaborate to figure out how to make best use of those resources and to try to advocate for ways that we can improve looking at it from a regional lens as well.
You mentioned earlier that you were observing more experiences from people couch surfing and things like that. Like what do you see? What are you learning is the root of homelessness in these 3 West Kootenay communities?
Well, that is complex. Homelessness is complex, so it's really hard to answer that question because it really depends on the individual. But we have the colliding crises right now of the opioid epidemic, housing prices, even extreme weather. And then a lot of folks who are living rough on the street, they have personal barriers that make it harder as well. These could be things like mental health, substance use, or physical or cognitive impairment that contribute to it. So there's no one way, but it can be quite easy to all of a sudden find yourself in a situation where you don't have housing. And if you don't have the supports there or know how to access the supports there to get you and help you, you could end up on the street quite rough.
Well, we heard from a caller yesterday in Squamish, in fact, where he said while they're building and building, there's just nothing within reach for someone like him. He's actually had to go and stay in an encampment, attend encampment a couple of years ago at points in his life, and is now living in a room in a home that is slated to be sold. And he was saying that it was very difficult to find any resources. He couldn't seem to find, any kind of emergency shelter, a place where he could stay, and he's had to move around himself. He had to go to Lac La Hache at one point during the winter. Is it just about coordination or actually a lack of resources?
It is, I would say probably, and this is just from me listening. I'm always listening to what's happening across the three communities. And it is a lack of available housing. It is a lack of resources and funding. The Castlegar shelter is scheduled to close at the end of the month. It's a cold weather shelter. Where are those folks going to go? And there's services to help support them. And so that's just one example of a place that is helping folks.
And why is it closing?
It's because it was a cold weather shelter, and so the funding was put across that they close at the end of the month. But there's lots of really good work happening there, and actually the mayor of Castlegar just put out a press release and a letter to the Minister of Housing yesterday, really expressing that it's an important asset to help support our most vulnerable that's working well.
Now, and you talk about the cold extreme weather, and we know that communities, rural communities, can feel more extreme impacts from climate change. You think about forest fires and who's been affected there. I'd love to ask you about that, but we actually have someone who's calling in who can touch on that as well. Our number again is 1-800-825-5950, 604-669-3733. We're talking about homelessness in BC's smaller communities, and we're asking you what you are experiencing or observing if you live in a small BC municipality. And let's head to Pemberton, and Allison is calling us. Hi, Allison.
Hi there. Thanks for having me.
Thanks very much for calling in. What have you been seeing?
So, I'm simply a resident in the community, and we're definitely seeing in the last year or two more homelessness just sort of landing on our streets and in the forests and behind where residents are living. Young people, but clearly there are mental health and potentially addiction issues going on. We had one young man from Quebec with everything he ever owned on his back, a tattered up sleeping bag, partially burned, a snowboard. He was about 20, 21, and he was trying to be out for the winter, nowhere to live, living in the forest, having fires at night. This is just one example. But clearly there were mental health issues because we would hear him screaming in the middle of the night. When my husband was walking the dog, there were, he felt like scared of my husband and was yelling and accusing him of doing things. And so it's just sort of this alarming situation when we tried to get resources involved, the non-emergency RCMP, even to see if there was outreach from the health center. There wasn't really funding for it, and we were sent to the local not-for-profit. They, of course, didn't really have the capacity either. They had one person come up once every couple of weeks and probably underqualified to handle the situation. And now this year, there's another individual the same way, and they end up going to the library during the day and the community center to have maybe showers, maybe not, but they haven't showered for months, and all of our children are there doing programming. So it becomes the librarian's problem, which isn't fair either. So it's sort of this, everybody's punching off the problem to someone else, and clearly we're not resourced to handle it effectively. Yet, the compassion and the care that is required to approach these individuals is clearly necessary, and just offer them a bed for the night on the cold nights, or just food even.
Wow, I imagine a traumatic experience for yourself and your husband, and for this individual as well. And you looked for resources and couldn't find them, and you're observing an increase in homelessness in Pemberton. What would be your message then, I guess? Here we are sort of collecting this data as Selkirk College is and Jamie is, but what would be your message? Here we are, with a provincial government that is trying to deal with and a federal government trying to deal with homelessness.
Well, I think clearly somebody needs to be monitoring and collecting the data and the information and assigned to respond to these individuals. I'm not sure if it's because we're within 2 hours of a major urban center that there's, quick drop off of the bus for some folks. But I know there's been, just even anecdotally, more reports of overdose responses in our community. We never saw this before 3, 4, 5 years ago. So clearly there just needs to be resources and new programming to support it. And I'm not an expert, so I don't know what those are, but attention for sure.
We appreciate your perspective, your firsthand perspective, Allison. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
That's Allison from Pemberton. Jamie, what do you take from her call? How does that reflect what you've been hearing about in the West Kootenays?
Yeah, I mean, we have similar things too, and a couple things stand out is we do have good outreach in our region. Of course, there's never enough resources, and we keep experimenting and trying in different ways. Like outreach has been expanding across into the different communities. So it's been in Nelson for a while, and we now have it in Castlegar and in Trail. But there's limitations within that, within the non-for-profit. The care is there and they want to do it, but the number of resources. So again, just going back to Castlegar, because it's top of mind for me, funding for outreach is actually attached to the shelter. So with the shelter closing, so does the funds for outreach. And so you're losing that resource. But when you think of, when I think about this, the housing first model always comes to mind. Is we can't help someone get through a mental health crisis or whatever barriers they have if they don't have housing. It's the Maslow's hierarchy of needs, where the very base that we have to take care of is taking care of those basic pieces like housing. And then once that's in place, then you can start supporting people through whatever barriers or things that they're working through so that they could work their way up to become that productive member of society that we all want folks to be like, and in themselves included.
You were talking about the Castlegar shelter, the cold weather shelter closing. We're going to hear from a community now not too far away from where you are. Sally is joining us from Chetwynd. Hi, Sally.
Hi, my name is Shelley.
Hi, Sally. Thanks for calling in.
Yeah, not Sally, sorry, Shelley.
Shelley, my apologies, Shelley.
That's okay. I'm calling in regards to, I work at the shelter. It's my first time ever working at this shelter, and it's just been a 3-month job, and it's closing on the 26th, and it was a privilege to work there and try and help the people. I'm just finding out a little more about this shelter, but it's just a seasonal shelter, so the people that do come in this shelter are from all over BC. It's just not for the locals. There's locals that have been in the shelter, but quite a few travel from all over to find a place to stay due to no housing and lack of just, they can't get a job and et cetera, et cetera. And one of the reasons why I got the job at the shelter was because my sister was found froze to death 4 years ago and in the park in Chetwynd, and she had really no resources to reach out to have a place to live. She did have a small place that was a shelter through a pizza place in Chetwynd, and she was staying there, and she could stay with me also, but she had her own lifestyle, and she'd just take off and do whatever she wanted, and unfortunately she was found froze. So it would be nice to see the shelters in the small communities staying open 12 months of the year, even though in the summer they can go find camping or whatever. They're all still wandering around aimlessly trying to find a place to live when there's no housing.
Wow, Shelley, thank you for sharing, and you've shared a lot there. I'm so sorry for your loss.
Yes, thank you. Like I said, I kind of got the job there, last one hired in end of January, just reaching out to just try and help the people and see. It's getting worse, and I've not experienced this really ever until the last few years, right? So I feel bad for all the people that just seem like they're running aimlessly looking for help and jobs or funding for just a place to stay and live, and there's no place to stay. Well, there are places to stay, but the cost is so high they would never be able to afford it. Right. So thank you for letting me share, and I'm looking forward to going back to the shelter in the fall when it opens up. But my point being is that if they could, the smaller communities aren't getting the funding for to stay open 12 months of the year to help the people find better solutions for their life and jobs, etc. Bigger centers get to stay open for 12 months of the year. As far as I know, Dawson Creek is an hour away, they're staying open 12 months of the year by what I was told yesterday. But anyway, and then Slash Shelter people have no work, right?
Yes, for that time as
job.
well.
Yeah.
What you're doing is very admirable, given the loss that you've felt. Shelley, thank you so much for calling in. I'm really glad to hear from you.
Well, thank you so much for letting me share, and have a good day.
All the best to you. That's Shelley in Chetwynd. We've heard this a couple of times now. You've alluded to it as well, Jamie, the need for these shelters to stay open. I'm wondering if that's going to be a recurring theme. We are also dealing now with, I was touching earlier on extreme weather events, wildfires, and it's going to be harder to ensure everyone's safe if people are dispersed, right?
Absolutely. I mean, the research that we done this summer was actually done during quite extreme temperatures as well as smoke. And so the students who were going out trying to connect with those unhoused even had a hard time finding them. And that's one of the issues is then when folks are dispersed, it's harder for them to get to services. And one of the other important pieces with this is there's been some really great work that's happened where services get congregated in one spot to help support the vulnerable population. So, for example, in Nelson, they had a coordinated access hub where a lot of service providers could be in one location. So an individual could go and they could address multiple things all in one visit, make it as and low barrier for them as possible. And those types of services were in Castlegar last summer as well. And what we heard from talking to folks is that was so helpful and so powerful for them to have that one-stop shop to be able to talk to the multiple service providers. Yeah. And so there's limited funding for that. And so those resources are no longer available right now in our region. And so it's all these things that we've heard work, but it's figuring out how to get those resources to our region in a long-term way so that we can continuously help folks, because all the nonprofits and the folks supporting the social service workers are like, they care so much and they really, really want to help, but there's a lack of resources.
First year of a 3-year project. I really appreciate your joining us to tell us about it, and it sounds like something we're going to keep talking about as well. Thank you for your time, Jamie.
Thank you so much for having me.
Jamie Jones is a researcher with Selkirk Innovates at Selkirk College. Thank you for all of your calls. You can email us to bctoday@cbc.ca.